Excellent. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. We are here live on Facebook with another Samee Whiz sessions. These are gathering momentum and they are proving more and more popular week by week. This week, really excited. Trethowans have always been great supporters of ours, and Mark in particular, who's joined us, has been an amazing support and advocate alongside the charity, and is always good to join us. So we've got some people that are coming in to say hello. The team are saying hi, and we'll have some questions maybe from the audience where they'll pop into the comments, or they'll email us if they can't comment live and send them in. Sam's on as well, so she's on questions today, so any questions you can email her. And Mark, thank you ever so much for coming to join us today. So I'm going to hand over to you and let you introduce yourself to the audience and just tell them a little bit about yourself and your background and who you are and what you do.
Oh, thanks, Ricky. Good morning, everyone. I'm Mark Nixon. I'm a corporate lawyer at Trethowans. So basically, I sort of advise business owners on all sorts of things, from buying and selling their companies to corporate governance and share incentives and all that sort of thing. Based in Bournemouth and Poole. And as I say, I've been doing it for 12 years and live locally and have worked alongside Samee on various bits and pieces over the last few years and have enjoyed working and supporting them.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mark. And thank you for joining us today. So what we're saying to people is, obviously, the website we've put up is trethowans.com, so you can get on to there. But as we know, Mark is a very, very busy person. So what we're going to ask people, if you have any questions, if you're watching the repeat of this and you've got any questions, or you want to contact Mark following this, rather than bombarding him with lots and lots of different emails, we're going to ask that if you contact Sam at samee.co.uk, or you contact myself, which is Ricky at samee.co.uk, then we can forward the questions on and get any responses that we need to, or if it's something Mark feels he needs to deal with directly, then with your permission we'll pass on details. Does that sound like a good idea, Mark? You're happy with that one?
That works for me. Thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful. Okay, so I think let's get into today's session, and let's start asking some questions and finding out some more. We've had a couple of people that are saying hello. So we've got Michael has said morning all. Also, Sam has just popped up the email again there in the comments. So you've got the email address for Sam at Samee, and you can post a question live, or you can also send it to Sam if you can't post on the live session. So my first question for you then, Mark, people are always interested to know, how did people get into the path they've chosen with their career or their income? So for you, how did your legal career start, and what made you choose this career path?
So for me, it was something, I think, from quite a young age. I'd sort of always kind of thought that would be the direction I would head in, and over the years, that was sort of the path that I took. Whether or not I sort of closed my mind to other options, I'm not sure. It's I think certainly one of the things I've enjoyed having become a lawyer and is getting to see lots of different businesses, which I find really interesting because of the different ways in which people have found to make money and to make businesses successful. So I do often wonder whether actually I sort of subconsciously sort of set myself on a path perhaps at too young an age and maybe didn't do enough research, but it's not a decision I regret. As I say, I've sort of at an early age, I kind of always thought that was something I'd like to do, and sort of as I went through school and university, sort of progressed and headed in that direction.
Fantastic. So it's kind of always led you in that direction then. And what was your experience of university? I know we hadn't discussed that question, but as you sort of said about university, I'm going to ask you, what was your experience of university?
So I didn't do a law degree, I did a history degree. So I did sort of keep my options a little bit more open than just going straight into a legal career. I think if I was to be truthful, I probably took my foot off the gas a little bit through university, and it was only actually once I left university and did the conversion to law that I really sort of started to recognise that actually, if I wanted to make my a career for myself and to it's so competitive. Everyone is so good at every level. So I realized then that actually, if I really wanted to make this work, I was going to have to really knock it down and work hard. And it was when I did the conversion and converted and did what's called the legal practice course. It was at that point that I really sort of started to work exceptionally hard to sort of achieve my goals.
Wonderful. So you had a bit of you had a bit of downtime and enjoyment at university then. If anyone has got any questions while we're going through, like we said, add them into the comments. So that's absolutely fine. And also let us know if you're getting value in the comments section as well, and what you're taking from this today. Few people have said hello. Liz has said hello on the show. She's watching. Michael said hello as well. Obviously, the team at Samee are tuned in and watching, and I think a couple of the trustees are on board, but they've not said hello yet. So we'll wait for them to say good morning. But just going back to coming to the charity, because I know that we've had some great fun working together on some of the projects, and I wanted to ask you, what have you enjoyed most about volunteering alongside the charity?
I think it's been with different hats, so different aspects I've enjoyed for different reasons. But I think it part of it stems from actually what I enjoy about my job, which is partially helping businesses to succeed and providing the advice that enables them to do it in a prudent way and to overcome issues and all that sort of stuff. And I think actually what I've really enjoyed about the charity is been doing that in a completely pro bono setting, where actually it is just about sort of helping people to succeed and achieve their goals, and not actually worrying about the financial side of it. It's been very rewarding to be able to help and to see people on their journeys. And when you see someone achieve something that ultimately comes down to their own hard work, but if you played a small part in facilitating that, it's very rewarding.
Excellent. Yeah, sometimes it's nice just to be able to let go of the financial aspects and just say, actually, yeah, I want to help, isn't it? So what are the most common problems that you find that new businesses present you with when they're starting up?
I think the biggest challenge is often comes down to cost and financing, because when a small business is getting going, chances are, unless you're very well backed financially, you're going to have a finite amount of resources. And whilst everyone wants to do things to the best of their abilities, that does mean that you are going to have to be quite selective and pick and choose where you focus and where you focus those resources in the outset. And so for me, when I'm seeing clients come to me, sometimes the paying for the advice can be a hurdle to actually getting that advice. And it's a really difficult situation for new businesses, not just in terms of legals, but in everything that they do, that you've got to weigh up. First and foremost, you've got to get the business going, and you've got to start getting that traction. And some of that is going to be very, very commercial spend on whatever it is, the product, the customers, whatever, to get that going. And that's obviously important, because if you don't have that, you don't have a business for us to be talking about. You've then got in the background of that, from my perspective, the legal framework. And whilst that will come at a cost to get the right advice, it's important, because what that will do is provide that framework for you to provide that business and to make sure that you do it in a secure manner. I'm sure we'll perhaps come on to that in more detail in a bit, but where that can be a challenge is for businesses who clearly want to get their contracts right and their terms right and all of that sort of thing, but equally have got finite resources. And so it's a difficult act weighing that up. And I think the one thing that I would say is inevitably you are going to have to be careful and make sensible decisions in how you deploy those resources. But if you do, perhaps cut the corners is the wrong word, but if you do sort of do that at the expense of certain things that ideally you would have liked to put in place, it's just making sure that they don't get put on the back burner for too long. And that actually once the revenue starts to come through and you start to get the business working, that you revisit those and make sure that if you have had to be a little bit more sensitive about where your spend is, that you catch that up and make sure that the longer term security of your business is there, because you've put in place the right measures to protect that.
Brilliant. And I think we've just had a question from one of the teams actually, that is it let me just bring this up. Is it better to pay for the advice rather than having to deal with the issues later? So that's a question that's come in on the emails there.
It's a really difficult one, because at the outset you may not necessarily have a choice, and it is a really balancing act to get that right at the outset. Having said that, quite often we do see people come to us later down the life cycle of their business where they've got a problem, and yes, that problem can sometimes cost a lot more to fix than it would have done to have got it right at the outset. And so it is important, as best that you can, that you just try and get things right from the outset, and as you go through, to try and avoid. That's basically what you're doing. That's what a lot of that sort of spend is for, is trying to reduce the risk of having problems later on that could be far more costly for your business and far more difficult to fix once they're there.
Yeah, so it's a bit of a balancing act, really, between what's the potential cost later down the line if it goes wrong, to what are you going to spend now, really.
Yeah, that's exactly right. In a perfect world, you'd have the finances there to get all the advice you need and to have absolutely everything perfect. But that's not the reality. So it's trying to be commercial about it at the right time. And a lot of the trick is being good at gauging where you can be a bit more commercial and perhaps take a bit more risk, and identifying those areas where actually, do you know what, these aren't risks you should be taking, and it doesn't, they actually really deserve having a bit of time and money spent on them at the outset.
Excellent. And we've just had a email, which I think this kind of will follow on from what we've just been talking about a little bit. Someone else has just emailed in and said, do I need to do terms and conditions for my business?
Yeah, and they're very, very important, because they set out the framework for what it is you are going to deliver. And look, 9 times out of 10, you hope that having negotiated and agreed those terms, you can put them in a drawer and never have to look at them again. And if a problem arises, you have a good relationship with the other party and you solve it between you and agree a sensible solution. But where these terms and conditions come into their own is where you've got that as the fallback, and actually there is a problem, and you need to know how you're going to fix that problem and how you're going to deal with that. And if you've got a well negotiated set of terms and conditions, it provides that template and that fallback for you to rely upon, so that you can hopefully solve those problems more easily than you would otherwise if you hadn't done it. So the sorts of things that you would look to cover off in your terms and conditions would be a clear explanation of what it is you're expecting to deliver, or what you expect from the other party. Covering off liability is quite important. Either if you're providing a service or a product, what are the limits on your liability? How much should you be at risk if things go wrong? Conversely, if you're relying on someone else to provide something to you, you need to be aware of what their limits on liability are, to make sure that they reflect the level of risk that you might be taking in relying on that service or that product. Setting out the price and how that's not always straightforward, and you've got other factors like, well, is that a fixed price for a one-off arrangement, or is that going to apply for a period of time, and when does that come to an end, and when can you renegotiate that price? All those things are sort of worth thinking about. Is this a relationship just between you and that party and no one else? Have you got a degree of exclusivity? Depending on what it is you're doing, those are the sort of things that you would want to look to cover off in those terms and conditions. If someone's saying to you, I will only supply my goods to you, or you're doing the same, you'd want to cover that off in the contract. And then other things like, well, what happens if the quality isn't there? Who's responsible for that? And again, that ties back into sort of limits on liability and how those caps would work. Is if that quality isn't good enough, are you responsible for that? Is the other party responsible for that? And making sure that you've got that clearly set out, so that there's an understanding between the parties as to what will happen if things go wrong.
Excellent. And I think we've actually had an email come in with another question, but it ties in with the question that was coming up as well. So the question that was coming up, and I'll also say what the emails come in, was how important is a partnership agreement? What is it, and what should go into it? And the email has also said, my friend and I are setting up a business. Do we need a partnership agreement? The bank has asked for one, but we are best friends. So I think that kind of all ties in quite nicely together with that question.
Yeah, so the overriding starting position is exactly the same with the terms and conditions. it's a framework for how that relationship is going to work, and you hope that it gets put in a drawer and nobody ever needs to look at it, because if you're all getting on 9 times out of 10, you'll be able to solve problems between you. It's when things aren't going right, that's when these documents come absolutely into their own, and it provides you that framework to try and navigate your way through those problems. So partnership agreements, shareholders agreements, they're all trying to do sort of the same thing, which is setting out the house rules for the relationship. Partnership agreements are relevant where you're in partnership. So that's where you've got 2 or more people sort of working together to generate a profit. And shareholders agreements are more relevant if you've got a company and it's dealing with the relationship that the shareholders have. The thought processes are relatively the same, so perhaps I'll just talk about them more generally. The only thing I would say that is more specific for a partnership is that if you are in a partnership as recognised in law, and that's a matter of fact, it doesn't matter what you think so much, it will be a fact based on the way in which you are operating. But if you are operating as a partnership, there are a set of default provisions that will be assumed to apply unless you agree otherwise. And that may or may not fit commercially what you have agreed with your partner. So it's particularly important with the partnership to make sure that you have thought about these arrangements, because actually if you just say nothing, there is a default set of provisions that apply, which may be a shock to you and a surprise, and deal with things in a way that you would never have intended it had you been aware of it. So in terms of the answer about the question for a partnership agreement, yes, you should definitely have one. And actually, if it's a friend, I think it's almost even more important, because it's only there for if things don't go right. So actually, that's when it's valuable. And actually, that could be quite good for saving the friendship, because at least then you've got it agreed. While you're getting on, you've got an agreed structure to work to, and hopefully that will help you navigate it. In terms of the sort of things that you would expect it to cover, how much are you putting in? What are you going to? What profit shares are you going to have? What are you going to get paid? Have you got to put any loans in or anything like that to get the business going? How are you going to make decisions? And more importantly, what happens if you can't agree on something? Is there a mechanism? You can agree various different ways, from perhaps having a third party that you trust to other sort of mechanics which perhaps might enable you to overcome that, particularly if there's only 2 of you, so the chances of a deadlock are increased. What happens if one of you wants to leave? What happens if one of you wants to does something that they shouldn't have done? What mechanism has the other one got to perhaps try and bring the partnership to an end? These are all the sorts of things that there is a relatively tried and tested means of which that they can be dealt with and documented with commercial input, of course. But these are the sorts of issues that all need to get covered off in a partnership agreement to just try and future-proof the arrangement. And work happens. What if this happens? That's very much what it's trying to do, and to just set that framework so that if things go wrong, you've got an agreed position that hopefully enables you to get through it without having to have a complete breakdown of the relationship.
Brilliant, fantastic. And I think, like you highlighted there, yeah, absolutely. If you're friends, I think that's what we've always said to people as well. So it's good to hear you kind of clarify that as well, that if you're friends, then it's even more important, because it could most importantly save a friendship more than anything else. So I've had another question actually come in, which is a question we get asked quite a lot actually, about limited companies. Does a limited company protect me more than being a sole trader? We've just got that's better. Does a limited company protect me more than being a sole trader? I've had conflicting advice. Okay, so
perhaps I'll ask you more generally, and at the same time, sort of with the specifics of this question. So there are 4 obvious vehicles when you want to set up a business. You've got a sole trader, which is someone basically conducting business on their own. You've got a partnership, which is 2 or more people who are basically working together with a view to generating a profit in a common business. Then you have what's called a limited liability partnership, which is a sort of a cross between a company and a partnership. So it has a sort of separate legal identity, but it's treated more like a partnership than a company. And then you've got the companies themselves. Now, sole traders and partnerships, the sole trader and the partners are are responsible for the losses and the debts of their vehicles. So a sole trader has unlimited liability for anything that they enter into in terms of their business. LLPs and companies are separate legal personalities. So they are actually they're it's legally they're seen as a sort of almost like a living and breathing thing. So a company and an LLP can enter into contracts, and they have, as the title, or can have, limited liability. So yes, on the face of it, if you were to set up a company rather than a sole trader, then as a shareholder in a company, generally speaking, your liability is limited to the amount that you put into that company. So usually it's what you pay for your shares, and that is the limit of your liability. It's not quite as straightforward as that. Examples where that sort of limit and that protection can get eroded are perhaps if you needed some bank finance. The bank might say, well, that's all very good, but this is a limited company, so I would like you to give a personal guarantee. At which point you're breaking down that limited liability and that protection that it gives you if the company is then able to repay those debts. The other thing you have to be slightly careful of as well is if you are a director of a company, if you do things that you shouldn't do as a director, so directors are under legal duties to act in the best interest of the company and whatnot, then if you were to breach those duties, you could again potentially expose yourself to the risk of personal liability. But to come back to the very sort of basic question, then yes, a sole trader has unlimited liability for the debts that they accrue and the liabilities that they accrue in business. A company at a very, very basic level, that liability is limited to the amount that you agree to put into it as a shareholder.
Brilliant. Thank you. I think that's cleared it up for a lot of people, and shown them that yes, although there is that limit there, there is certain risk if you're not following the rules, as they say. In terms of, and actually we've covered the different types, which was great. You brought that in as well, so that was good. So we kind of talked about the types and the pros and cons of those. How important contracts? People always ask us about contracts and things like that. And some people don't even think about them when they're starting up. But how important are contracts for services and products? And what are the most important things, which I think we covered a little bit in the terms and conditions?
So they're absolutely key to making sure that you've got a legal framework in which you're conducting your business, and the importance of that framework is that it enables you to have certain protections and certainty around how things will go. You know, if nothing goes wrong, you can kind of trade without any of this and just get on, and you never have a problem. But when things go wrong, it's that point that people start to look at the contracts, and that's where it becomes really, really important. So setting out sort of key terms of what you're doing, the price, who's delivering what, when are they delivering it, what happens if they don't deliver it on time, what happens if the product doesn't meet the quality. Things we mentioned earlier are all absolutely vital things to cover off in that contract. And I think where I most commonly see problems with the contracts is when we're looking to buy or sell companies. Buyers will come in and do legal due diligence, and they'll look under the hood and they'll say, oh, well, what is it that I'm actually buying? And they will look at those contracts, and actually those contracts, whilst they are only just legal bits of paper, they almost form the basis to some extent of the value of the business that's being conducted. Because if you've got very, very badly drafted contracts that don't provide the comforts and protections that you would perhaps normally expect, it means that if things go wrong, there's a greater risk that business has liabilities or doesn't maintain the value that it should have done. You know, it doesn't just come down to liability. If you were sort of expecting, if you were trying to, you know, you're the only person that's allowed to sell things in Bournemouth, if you don't have that contractually agreed and put in writing, then actually that relationship can be taken away from you quite easily if you've never documented it. So it goes to the heart of the value of what you're doing. And so whilst ultimately you want to make money at the outset, by putting in place the legal framework within which you're doing that underpins that value and underpins your ability to keep making that revenue. Because if you don't have that, there's a risk that at any given moment someone can just terminate and walk away, and suddenly you've not got what you thought you had.
Brilliant. Yeah, and I think that's like you say, it just sets out the contracts of the business. And we've had many ones that have asked us about, including people that are setting up like dog walking businesses, and we've said, you know, you need to think about in your contracts things like, you know, where you're going to be going into the property and what time you're going to be going in and how that's going to happen, so it's all kind of in agreement to help you. So when people are seeking guidance on legal areas of starting out on their own, how can people find the best advice, and what should they look for when selecting the individual company to support them?
I think to some extent you get what you pay for, and I think there hopefully will become a point with anyone's business where actually there is sufficient money there to say, actually, we really do need to get this done right now, and actually you do to some extent get what you get paid for. But also, as I said earlier, there are times when money is tighter and you've got to, you know, and you're just trying to get by on as tight a budget as you can at the outset. So, you know, obviously things like the Samee project are a fantastic resource that is available to people. The government website, I was on there earlier this morning, that has some good advice, high level advice around what you should be thinking about when starting up a business. Things like, you know, looking at, you know, what licenses, consents, regulations, all that sort of thing that you should be getting in place and setting up from the outset. In terms of the people, you know, there are sort of like citizen advice and places like that will provide advice. There are networking organisations that provide sort of peer-to-peer support, and they can be quite useful. But I think it's like with anything, you need to do your research and make sure that you know, you've looked into whoever it is that you speak to. Just because someone's expensive doesn't mean that they're good. Just because someone's cheap doesn't mean that you should just take their advice at face value because it's free. You know, you've got to do your research, ask around, get recommendations from people, have a look online, see what you can find out about them, see what they sort of say they've been involved with in the past. And generally, I think what you're looking for is someone that you can build up a relationship with and that understands your business and understands that where you're coming from, and provides that advice. And hopefully you'll find individuals out there that will be able to tailor it to help you at the point in the life cycle of your business that suits what you're able to afford at that time.
Brilliant, thank you. And I think, what would be your top 3 tips would you give to anyone starting a business based on your experience?
So, it's a bit of a cliche, but someone once said to me, he was a client, said that the things he always says and said to me were, you know, you've got to work harder, smarter and better than anyone else. And it sounds a bit of a cliche, but you do. You know, as I said, I recognized when I was at university that maybe I wasn't pushing myself as hard as some of my peers, and I corrected that when I went on to do to do my legal training. And it does, you know, if you work harder than everyone else, you're putting yourself in a much better position to be able to succeed. And frankly, anyone who tells you that they don't have to work hard to succeed is lying. You know, it comes with blood, sweat and tears, and there's sacrifices, and those are absolutely vital if you want to make a success of something. Working smarter is just simply trying to make sure that by working harder, you're not doing it in a way that is actually a waste of time. You know, it's not just about working hard, it's about working hard in the right way. So sometimes it's important to just take a step back and think about what you're doing, and is this the best way of doing it? Because actually, if you can get someone else to do it, or you know, by delegating, or if you can find a better way of doing something, then actually, you know, it's no good just sort of banging your head against the wall and just working harder and harder and harder. You've got to find smarter ways of doing that to make sure that you're efficient. And then being better, I mean, I think that's just a case of just striving to make sure that whatever it is you're doing, just make sure you're better than your competition. Whether that be by providing a better service, you know, better communication, a better product, whatever it is, but that should always be the goal. Doesn't mean you have to have the best product on the market. It's just got to be better. You know, you look at, for example, I suppose like Asda, they're not selling the best products, but they're selling quality at an affordable price, and so they want to be the best at doing that. So I think that ethos can apply to whatever it is you're doing, from simply just answering the phone through to the engineering of a product, if it's that sort of advanced. You know, just trying to do that better than anyone else.
Brilliant. And I think leading on from that, actually, and just chucking a little bit of a curveball in there, sorry, but you said about working smarter. So people working smarter and thinking about things, if they were coming to you to get some advice about the legalities of their business, setting up what sort of things they need, what they need to do, what would you say that they need to prepare before they came to their first meeting with you, just to help things along a little bit? What sort of things should they bring with them?
I think it's not necessarily just for me, but I think with any business, it's really important to do your research. You know, you really need to understand what your market is and what you're going into, and then how you and your product or your service are going to fit in that market, and how you will differentiate yourself from your competitors, and effectively have a plan to make sure that what you're doing actually has a chance of success from the outset. You know, lots of people have great ideas, but there's only a smaller number of ideas that can actually translate into a good business. And sometimes actually a great idea might be at the outset actually needs quite a lot of fine tuning and slimming down to actually make it work from a business perspective, because actually, you know, sometimes you see people get too obsessed with having a perfect product. Well, actually, that may not be a viable business option. Actually, what you need to do is perhaps, unfortunately, not such a good product, but one that is actually more affordable, and you can make it more easily and at a cost effective price. That is what people will buy, and that is what you'll be able to sell. And it comes at a compromise sometimes on sort of the vision you have at the outset. And so it's really a case of making sure you've really spent a lot of time getting under the skin of the market. Where are the opportunities for you? Why do you think your product and what you will doing will have a success? I think people who have then done that and have a clear direction as to where their business is going, it's then a lot easier to then have a conversation about, okay, well, how can we tailor in a service to support you, and where do we need to provide that support? But I think if you don't understand commercially where it is you're heading and what you want to achieve, it's very, very hard to then sort of take those views on where do you desperately need advice, and where's the risk, and where can you perhaps, if you need to be a bit more commercial and accept that you might take some risk in the short term, but that's a necessary evil if it's what finances require.
Brilliant. And I think, you know, there's been lots and lots of value added today with what we've covered so far, which is brilliant. But, you know, if you're getting value, let us know in the comments. If you've got any other questions that you want to ask that we maybe haven't asked now, then ask them. Like we said, if you think of a question, you're watching this on replay, then forward it to myself or Sam, and we will contact Mark and get some answers for you, just to kind of save Mark having lots and lots of emails potentially coming through, because we do know how busy he is. So I think, knowing what you know now from your journey, if you were to travel back to the younger you starting in your career, what would you say, and what would be your best advice?
I think, whilst I don't regret the sort of the journey that I've been on, I think, as I sort of mentioned earlier, at an early age, I got into my head that the path for me was to be a lawyer, and that probably shut me off to other ideas as I then went through and had greater opportunity to explore maybe alternatives. And so I think, almost a bit tying in with what I've just said about preparing a business, is that I think if I hadn't sort of focused so early on, and perhaps done more research and looked at the, you know, alternative careers and alternative businesses, that you know, I think it would have been quite an exciting prospect to look at all the weird and wonderful ways that people can make money. And yeah, so like I say, whilst I don't regret it, I think I wish I had perhaps paused and thought, actually, no, let's just take a step back and let's look and let's research into it and get a better understanding. Partly because when I was at school, you didn't get probably the greatest variety of jobs put in front of you. But certainly now that I'm doing the job that I do, I see some fantastic businesses who've got fantastic ideas and make money out of things that I could never have dreamed of. And it's really interesting just seeing the weird and wonderful ways that people have made great successes of the careers that they've chosen.
Brilliant, brilliant. And Lorraine is just saying that, you know, being able to take a step back and look objectively at what we're offering has been really helpful. It's not an easy thing to do, though. And I think that's quite right. Sometimes just taking that step back and looking at it and reflecting can be a little bit difficult for people sometimes. So yeah, so I think we've got some great stuff that's come out of today, and it's been a really, really good interview for people. There's been some great knowledge which I knew you were going to bring to the table anyway, Mark, with your experience, and I think there'll probably be some further comments as people watch this on the replay, watch it a bit later on. So we'll bring that. Any final thoughts or anything else you'd like to add, Mark?
I mean, just coming back on that comment that just came up just now about taking a step back being difficult. I totally agree, and I think even now within the firm that I'm working within now, there are certain people that I will sort of always just pick up the phone to, and I have a relationship with, where I can just get a second opinion and just say, what do you think about this? And you're right, when you're close to something, and particularly if you're emotionally involved with something, it's so hard to see the wood for the trees. And you know, and likewise, you know, I might be drafting a contract and I get so close to it, and I've read it so many times that I get to a point where perhaps I can't really read it anymore because I've stopped seeing anything new. And you do just having a second pair of eyes, just having a look at something, getting a fresh view, someone who's not as close to things as you are. Sometimes they can just say something that you think so obvious, and how couldn't you have seen it? But actually, and that doesn't have to necessarily always be a professional or a lawyer or an accountant or anything like that. Just someone that you trust and you know that is sensible can sometimes provide insight that you when you're so close to something just can't quite see.
Brilliant. Well, Mark, it has been really great, and you know, I always say time is the most valuable thing that someone has, so thank you for sharing that with us and putting things aside for a short period of time to be with us today. And if anyone has any questions, because we know, like we've said, because we know Mark is busy, you can contact ricky@samee.co.uk or sam@samee.co.uk with any questions, and we can try and get the answers for you from Mark, just to kind of field some of that. Mark works alongside Trethowans Solicitors, which, as I said earlier, have been a great support to the charity, and it is very, very much appreciated, all the support they give us, both in education and in the adult world. And yeah, just thank you ever so much. So it is a goodbye from me. Next week we have got a really exciting session as well, because we've managed to tie down the one and only Wayne, or Wanye as we all call him in the office, for a Samee Whiz session next Thursday, which is going to be just as good. We've got a couple of people that are just coming in and now and saying, Lorraine has said really enjoyable and informative. Michael has said, thanks, Mark and Ricky, very informative as well. And the office are waving at me saying it's been a great session. Thank you. They've got even the office have got some stuff to take away with them and use today. So yeah, so it's a goodbye from me. Goodbye from Mark.
Goodbye. Thanks, everyone.
And we will see you for another session next. Oh, and I think you're being watched in the office as well, Mark, because Trethowans have just said thank you for having us this morning. So they've been keeping an eye on what we're up to. So yeah, so thank you ever so much, and we will see you all at 11 o'clock next week.